So good to be with you today. I haven't done a more high-level presentation in a while because we've been deep in the open source lands. So I'm very, very excited for this talk in particular. I think the main theme of this talk, it doesn't need to get into too much of the specifics of research because we'll hear from many people after on that. I think there's a meta theme happening in crypto right now that everyone should really internalize, which is that the game is really stepping up. The bar is getting higher and we have to amp it up. So my name is Georgios. I've been working in crypto for a long time. I'm the general partner at Paradigm, where we invest in the best founders. I'm also the CTO at Paradigm, where we build some of the best open source software that many of you use. And most recently, I've been leading the Ithaca project as part of my work at Paradigm, where we're building a next generation wallet. So I want to start from the top and restate some table stakes things, which is that why are we doing this? Why is the DeFi movement and the DeFi projects important? I think it boils down to four main rules that we're going to explore across the presentation and how some of these rules are respected, some of them maybe we give up as the sector is growing and professionalization is coming and people are trying to move faster and maybe cut corners. The first one is global non-custodial financial access. What does this mean? It means global. It means that I can access it from anywhere in the world. It means that if I'm part of an oppressed regime, I can still access and transact my assets. It means that if I'm part of a regime that doesn't let me control my assets, I can still own them. And if I'm trying to escape from a war, I can still hold my assets. That is really important. And secondly, it's the transparent, verifiable rules. DeFi allows you to see the 2008 DeFi, the 2008 leverage and wind happen in real time. And that means and having a health meter on a whole system that is public and you can always know about it just hasn't been done before in a way that we know that metric is real and good. The third thing, which we've been hearing for a long time, is DeFi and smart contracts more broadly are like open APIs. It is kind of like the data scientists' open data, open API dream, where not only is all the data accessible, but also all of the compute is composable and all of the storage is composable, which is what allows beautiful things like the Uniswap v4 and Uniswap v4 hooks that Lily is very excited for. And the fourth thing about DeFi is that there's this general social norm of creating fair market structures. And fairness in academia is a long topic. You know, there's like many ways to define it and approach it. But I think the simple way that I see it is no privileged access. It's what you would call a level playing field, which means that if a new actor comes along, they play along the same rules as what another actor. And there's no centralizing force. You try to avoid economies of scale as much as possible when you can. You try to make it that if a new actor comes along, and that actor should be allowed to join without asking anyone, just by calling the smart contract function, that actor is immediately able to compete. And this is what creates this very beautiful, open, competitive landscape, which in the end only benefits the consumer in ways that are just unprecedented. So people might be busy, and I want to like land the key point like at the top, which is that independent of whatever is going on, independent of what you're working on, it doesn't matter if you're like doing cryptography, DeFi, consensus, market design, anything else. The most important thing is that things are changing, and we need to step up. The competition is becoming very ruthless. This is not just, by the way, on the industry, it's also on academia. I went to the iClear conference in Singapore a few weeks ago, which is one of the largest machine learning conferences, and 2 papers there were fully AI written. And it was quite interesting to see how, when I was asking people, okay, how do you write your papers? They just instant churn them out, and they immediately got the next one. The code is not reproducible. The charts might be wrong, the data might be wrong, but the thing that they care most about is publishing or perishing, like many academics know in the folklore. And I think this is just getting even more ruthless. And I think everyone should just think about how can I reinvent myself and how do I ship, how do I code, how do I do my research, like being very meta about what are the most important questions and how do I approach them in the most efficient way. Because if you don't do it, somebody else will, and you're not going to have a job next year. So which chart do people think this is when you're trying to ask the question, what does a young engineer choose to work on? Do I have any takers in the audience? Any raised hands? Yeah?
Solar panel production.
No. One more? Okay. The number of ChatGPT users. So first and foremost, you're not competing with the academic sitting next to you, with the DeFi protocol next to you. You need to zoom out and see what's going on in the world. And it is a fact that right now, the marginal talent that comes in, first decision they have to make is, what category of problems do I work on? And right now, one of the biggest talent black holes is this thing and all of the things that are in that same neighborhood. And if an engineer or a young researcher thinks, oh, I'm going to be building God versus I'm going to be building rigged casinos sometimes, then it's a bit of a tough sell when you need to compare these. So as an industry, while I love the speculative feedback loop, because I think it has a good public exhaust, and that is the ultimate dynamic of crypto, which is that on the surface, it is like a Trojan horse. On the surface, it has this very light, like kind of like speculative short-term thing, but under the hood, there is a back door of a new financial system that is going to change how everything works. But to get there, we need to ensure that the talent bar is really high and that we get the best people. And this is who we're competing against. Okay, one more puzzle. So this chart, how long until my competitor copies my feature? Because, okay, if we're competing against people that are very good, the best people are ruthless about copying, right? They will figure out a way to make it like legal and they will copy you ruthlessly. So which chart do people think this is? Can I get a raised hand? Yeah?
So users?
Close. One more? Really close. That was my other consideration, actually. It's the LLM context window size. So these days, what you can do is that you can take an entire code base, dump it. It's not going to do the perfect thing, right? Like so. And by the way, this whole deck, I haven't written LaTeX since my thesis. This whole deck was written by Cursor. Yeah. And papers should be written with that and so on, not Cursor necessarily, whatever you want. So, and again, a lot of this presentation is about the meta, about the concretes, because again, when the world is evolving in a very rapid pace, you have to be operating at a higher level of abstraction than before. So the latency to copy a feature is going to 0. That's a fact. The same thing is going to happen about when you have some new research that you publish. So let's say Siamak has some incredible research that he's publishing right now, and it's going to come, one paper is going to come now, and the next one is coming in 6 months, because it's still being worked on. The 6-month paper is going to get scooped. Because somebody is going to dump that and a bunch of the other papers into a context window, and then they're going to be able to figure out the insight for the next thing faster. Or if not that, they're going to be able to do the data analysis for that faster. Or if not that, they're going to be able to find the proofs to give the mathematical proof faster. So it's a lot about acceleration, and it's a lot about cutting corners and being able to move really, really, really fast. And people might say, oh, but the context windows are like larger context window means less accuracy. Sure, but you have to understand that things are improving at a faster rate than you can guess, and you don't want to try to be like too smart when things are changing too fast. So move fast, and just know that you're gonna get copied. So there's like a lot of like interesting implications around that on how people approach how they build in DeFi. What else is going on? And I got this data from Artemis. I reskinned it again, like for the Beamer presentation. I love how these charts look. Like I'm like a big fan. I'm gonna be doing Beamer presentations only from now on. So the interesting thing that's happening is that the stablecoin supply is growing a lot inside of crypto, and stablecoins are being adopted. This is not news to anyone at this point. It's tired. You see it on Twitter. You see it in Stripe sessions. You see it everywhere in the world that stablecoins are growing. I think there's some like interesting things to observe in this chart. It's how Tether is just so dominant, and how everyone, me included, that thought, oh, Tether might be insolvent, Tether might be not able to support its growth, Tether might be a rug or anything in these like neighborhoods, we were all wrong about it, and it's worth looking at this chart and reflecting on, again, calling death on something too early the same way that people called on Bitcoin, 1,000 times over all of these years. Now, another interesting thing about this chart is the USDC supply chart, where even though USDC is basically everywhere in quote unquote American DeFi, which I really dislike as a term, by the way, yeah, it is really interesting how the USDC supply basically has been flat, roughly, while Tether has been crushing. And this highlights how Tether has really won the distribution game on the ground, where they went and they talked to a bunch of merchants and they got them to accept things. Another thing that I heard from a couple people was that people in the world really loved Tether over USDC because Tether's perceived sketchiness was a feature, not a bug, because USDC is the American coin and maybe it spies on you versus the Tether coin that is a bit sketchy, that maybe is on Tron, which might be sketchy, might not be. It's a better place like to be getting safe harbor on. And I found that to be like a pretty interesting dynamic. Now, this chart might change a lot in the next few months. A few days ago at Stripe Sessions, which how many people in this room watched Stripe Sessions? Okay, not enough. I think everybody should be watching this stuff because the payments stuff that's going to happen, like stablecoins are the first legit use case that the world really gets. And if you're designing finance, and stablecoins are going to be the thing that like really drives all of the demand like in the next year, if you're not on top of that, then somebody else might be, again, in the point of competition. This chart might look very different. So Stripe announced its own stablecoin after acquiring Bridge, where Bridge was this stablecoin orchestration company which figured out how to get dollars into stablecoins, move them globally, then get them, offboard them into local banks. And they were able to basically use crypto in a way that the user doesn't perceive, but saves on a lot of the B2B costs. So this chart might look very differently, and like maybe in 2026, maybe this chart has like a whole different order of magnitude, and all of the stable coins are something that's running on Stripe. So again, this goes to highlight that the market structure is unstable. That was actually my previous candidate for talk title for this presentation. Now, the market structure feels a bit unstable. What we're seeing right now is kind of hard to take as reality when things are changing so much so fast. And the other interesting thing that Matt, my boss, gave me is that the supply historically is a lagging indicator. What does this mean? It means that stablecoin supply is generally sticky because you deposit it, you yield it. For example, in Ethereum mainnet, most of the stablecoins would be depositing and yielding. But the thing that's a leading indicator, that is where is the money going, where are things happening, is the stablecoin inflow and the volume onto a new ecosystem. And I think this is just very interesting data to go 10 layers deep of where is the money minted from? Is it bank accounts and Coinbase accounts? And where is the money going? Because that will tell you a lot about how the users are utilizing the system and where things are going. Now, the other thing I want to really highlight is that as the market is maturing, people have been confusing features for products and products for companies. This has been going on for a very long time. It is no longer enough to wedge on a simple feature or on a simple mechanism. You need more than just that. And again, this highlights how hard things are going to be and how much people will need to step up to be able to compete in this new ruthless landscape. So is everyone familiar? Who is not familiar with Hyperliquid in this room? Okay, so this is a perp dex that really went and melted faces the last 2 years, basically. And it did a lot of things right. People might disagree on a bunch of things that it did wrong, but the data speaks more than what my opinions say. And it melted faces, which you can, even if you don't know what it is, you understand that it did really well. What did it do really well? It verticalized. And this is going to happen everywhere. What does verticalization mean? It means that the marginal infrastructure, the marginal feature, the marginal gas per second is not enough. You need full stack product innovation. And this, when you're building something, it means that everything needs to be perfect, from the login experience to the fiat on ramp to the doing your first action. That is where the mechanism maybe starts to come in, right? If you have onboarding and you have some money, then maybe, okay, you can do something innovative. For example, if it's a token sniping situation, maybe you can do some way to make it fair. But what Hyperliquid did is it did a bunch of things right. One of them was that they decided to prioritize cancellations, for example, in the block building process. And in the perpdex market, where market makers need to do that very effectively to not get picked, that was a great feature. A lot of other things were done well around like the fair launch and like how they didn't prioritize any market maker. And I think it like really goes on to say how even though a bunch of like the Hyperliquid code is actually closed source, maybe one might say it's centralized so that it doesn't get, so it's maybe like antithetical to the ethos of crypto, but maybe it's fine, maybe, because for example, that means that adversaries cannot MEV by knowing like what the block building rules are or what what like other potential system exploits are. So yeah, verticalized products are winning, and it's really hard to stress how much like a tiny thing is not going to be enough like to win and to make a dent. Another very interesting thing, like in this chart, which doesn't show. Oh, actually, it's like in a different chart. But another interesting thing, I guess, like how the YDX like got completely melted, unfortunately, in this case. Okay, but I want to do a reality check that even though, these guys went and won basically the DeFi market, the DEX market, the perp DEX market, in context, it's tiny. And, I wanted to add like a centralized, a non-crypto futures variant of this, but the chart would have not fit in the slide. So I decided to not do it. But you can see how the real comparison, and it's too early for Victory Labs, the real comparison is versus Binance, OKX, like other perp dexes, perp centralized exchanges. This also has interesting downstream effects where, for example, stablecoin design that is not fiat backed, is kind of like derivative of how big the perp market you can support. And why Athena, for example, managed to grow a bunch is because they anchored to a centralized exchanges perp market, and they were able to like grow their stablecoin supply that way without having full fiat backed collateral under the hood. Whereas what we saw from the times of DAI and the others is that it is really hard, and Hashu wrote a blog post about how stablecoins are not scalable a million years ago, where if you have over-collateralized stablecoins, they cannot work, but maybe they can work in other ways if you can support something else like a delta-neutral yield-bearing position. So the perpdex market is just so important because I think it will let us get to some alternative non-fiat backed stablecoin. So if anyone is interested in working on that, I'd love to talk to you. And again, this also highlights how these guys went and destroyed the competition, and there's still a tenth of the real boss. And like a tenth is like actually a huge difference, in this world, because these systems are already pretty optimized, and it's basically demand bound. Binance has like a massive balance sheet. It can like go and like literally Bybit lost $1.5 billion, and they said Word will cover it, right? Versus if you're in the DeFi world, like it's kind of harder to do it, or you don't have many shots on goal to be able to save your users out of a disaster like that. The other thing that happened in recent years was the meme coin mania. And one interesting thing about it is that, well, it didn't happen on Ethereum, firstly, which, some might say, oh, but that is not activity I want on Ethereum. But there is some interesting downstream implications I will talk about in a second around path dependency. So because meme coins and generally super speculative trading activity is almost like a video game, more so. It's a high adrenaline, low attention span, TikTok type activity. where people have shown me, for example, like meme coin apps that are like a dating app where you can swipe right and left to like buy or not buy or buy or sell a coin. Yeah, people are doing that, right? Because like that's the form factor, that it feels like a game. And when you're building a game, if you think about it, like you're building a game, well, the game bar is that it needs to be instant and zero cost, because otherwise it feels bad and I'm just not gonna use it when I'm in the bathroom or something, right? I'm just gonna read a book. So it's really important to understand that people are using these things all the time from all over the place, and the fees and latency really matter. And this goes back to all of the things around performance. So it's not just the execution speed of the team, it's obviously the execution speed of the software. And the execution speed of the software needs to go end to end. And that's why the verticalization really matters, because when the chain is really fast, who here has used, for example, say MegaETH, testnet? Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, you guys should all use things, by the way, right? I think being detached from like what people use is gonna lead you to do the wrong research. If you have used any of these like low latency chains, you will quickly observe that while the chain is really fast, the infra around it is garbage. Which is really funny, because I saw that video of like someone using the GTE app on MegaETH, and the app was like great, like the chain like instantly confirmed things, but the MetaMask pop-up, oh my god, that was like click, pop-up, loading, simulation, click, oh, the fee quote is stale, wait for the upgrade, wait for it to get updated. Or order of like 5 to 10 seconds when the chain should be able to confirm things instantly. So it is end to end. It's not just on the chain level, the performance, it goes all the way. And I had like in another presentation had this slide about there's the Swiss cheese model of security, where basically like you do defense in depth to avoid the hack going through. I think there's also the Swiss cheese of UX, where basically there's the fiat on ramp, there's the bridge, there's the MetaMask, there's the the transaction landing, and like so much of like the good things, just the good users just don't make their way all the way through because they hit random walls. Versus when an app is verticalized, it's able to really line up all of those pieces, and the user can flow through like really nicely. So what does this tell us? It tells us that performance matters. Performance also means fees, it means latency, but it also applies to every layer of the stack. And that speculative use cases definitely bring users in. But do the users stay? Right? So I think that is like an important thing that people don't talk about enough, is the user's retention. And how do you retain these users? Okay, if you did all of this like high performance stuff and you outcompeted everyone, and it turns out that the most PMF use case for crypto is trading, which again, some people might like it, some people might not. I don't know where I stand on it personally even, but the reality is that like that is the dominant use case of crypto. How many of these users stick around? And I think this is like an interesting chart on stablecoin volume, where you would expect that people enter the chain on a stable asset or onto the native asset, then they trade a bunch, and then they kind of fade away. So you can clearly see the green bar here is Solana, and you can clearly see how there's like lots of volume boiling up right before like the craziness happens. So I don't know if I have a chart. Never mind. Basically, you can clearly see it boiling up, but the moment the stablecoin mania, the meme coin mania disappears, and you can see the DEX volume on Radium being basically almost like perfectly correlated with how the green chart on the stablecoin volume happens, it almost tells you that there is like very, very little retention in all of these. I think somebody should really go deep and litigate this point. Again, where is the money going? I think that would be a banger blog, write-up, video, lecture, whatever you want to call it. I think it would like shed a lot of light. Because in crypto, the hardest thing to do when things are moving really fast is like getting a sense of what is real and what isn't. There's CBILs, there's incentives, there's all sorts of like there's the tokens which make things like really muddy. So it's really important to really go deep on what is actually real. And that's not an obvious question, because what is real can, you can tell me that a fee paying user is real. So there's a lot of ways to define it, a lot of ways to see it. I think all of them should be explored, because otherwise we will never be able to have a really clear picture. Even, for example, the stablecoin volume, when the fees are very low, you don't know that there's not a botnet farm that's like just doing some like ring-shaped, transfer of funds to like show that things are going. If I know for a fact that like if there's like TikTok farms, TikTok click farms, where there's one person with like 50 phones in front of them and they're just clicking things around, I know that like the DeFi MEV people have come up with insane swarm tactics to make the activity look real, to convince someone that their infrastructure project is real. So retention, volumes, downstream of speculation, what's going to happen to stablecoins in that world, right? Super interesting questions. I would look into them more deeply. You also see how base rose. I think that might be Clanker on base, because a lot of people were going like from USDC to meme coins and back. I think that might be it, but like I think that's also interesting to like go deeper on it. One interesting thing is that Ethereum's volumes remained consistently, at some, very respectable like area, despite probably not having most of the speculative activity. Why? Because meme coins did not happen on Ethereum. So if there's something to say about, there's some question or I don't know about conclusion, but there's more questions to be drawn around, okay, if Ethereum's volume was basically on a very similar area as before, but a lot of the speculation, the speculative volume died off, what is going on? Why are people using that despite the fact that the fees are high? So that concludes the first part of the talk, which is I want to really, really drive the point home that the game is getting really, really hard, and everybody is going to need to step up. I said that in the beginning, I'll say that now, you will hear me say that at the end of the talk. The talent bar is high, nothing is defensible, the tech is really good, so people can build products with it, and there's clear PMF for the very least stable coins and perps, and maybe there's a lot of things downstream of that. And maybe what happens is that the stablecoins and the perps are like the headliner of the show, and a lot of the other things are public exhausts that just come out of that, which even that I think could be great. You have a machine that just does a bunch of trading and payments, and out of that you get a self-sovereign world computer. I think that's super exciting. Now, downstream of that, so okay, we got competition, we got acceleration, DeFi went mainstream, we ate Wall Street, all of that stuff. Did we give everything up in the process? Because everyone that moves really fast has got to make some trade-off. They can't be that much better. So sometimes they are, but the ones that are that much better, they just do what Hyperliquid did, and they just wreck faces. So acceleration requires extreme thoughtfulness. How can I move the pointers? Yeah. Acceleration requires extreme thoughtfulness, because by default, if you accelerate, I think without principle, you will giga-centralize, and that might not be great. And I think the core point of this is that the competitive pressure may cause a developer to take the closed path. And there's probably a lot of memes about the light and the dark side here. I don't think it's necessarily a dark side, because when you're building a business, you have to really make decisions that are good for the business, and your ideals sometimes might disagree with that stuff. And I think the best people are the ones that are able to thread that needle and, of course, navigate to something that's like net good for the quote-unquote for the world and for their business together. And I think there's like some like really clear examples for this. For example, if you have a smart contract or a node software, my expectation, for example, would be that the nodes are open source, MIT or Apache licensed or GPL, that the smart contracts are verified, that the smart contracts are audited. Either they have like extreme testing inside of them, whether it's via Foundry or other tools, or they have been looked on by some security firm, which I have separate opinions on security firms, kind of like in the check mark that they give, which might be a gatekeeping element that should be not as prevalent. On the other path, you might get security through obscurity. And I think there's like some under-discussed topic here, which is there's real microstructure benefits that a smart contract might get from being closed source. For example, if it's an AMM, not leaking the strategy to adversaries. I think this was happening, for example, on Solana with the Solfi AMM, which turned out to be the Ellipsis guys, where basically Eugene and friends, they said, okay, we're not gonna make it open because it has like an interesting strategy in it, and we don't want people to pick it off. And it turned out that this really worked, and they grew a lot in adoption. What I don't personally like is things that are both closed source and they have this instant upgrade functionality, because if it ends up that even if it's a reputable team, if the upgrade key for any reason is compromised, a lot of money might disappear instantly. And in some cases, it's much more serious. I think the particularly high explosion radius, high contamination risk use cases are things like a bridge or an oracle, right? Because bridges have a lot of money at one place. If you hack the bridge keys, 600 million run in funds disappear, and then you have to deal with stuff that you don't want to think about. Similarly for oracles, an oracle can cause a mass liquidation event. It can also make a lot of people lose money in an instant, or it can make you mint a lot of money in an instant. Proposers, good arguments for both permissionless and permission. The permission proposer might decide to just not MEV you, which might be really great because it lets you offer a better product, whereas a permissionless proposer is obviously great for censorship resistance. MEV, similar approach. Stablecoins, you can really see that the fiat-backed stablecoins are really scaling, but they ultimately end up controlling the L1 or the L2 that they're on. And I think that's by the way, I think that's a real risk. So as real-world assets scale up and grow, I think it's going to be really interesting to see their impact on the layer below them, and like how they end up either benefiting or ultimately potentially hurting the base layer. And for the wallets, obviously, a lot of improvements can be done to self-custody. I think the adoption of passkeys in all modern hardware and browsers is going to be super exciting for modern self-custody wallets. But on the other hand, of course, it's much more convenient if you can log in with Trudy with your Gmail, for example. Maybe there's ways to get the best of both worlds. Maybe. What I think we should really defend is no rugs, open APIs, composability. I think these are the cornerstones of DeFi. And thirdly, the global 24/7 access. It's kind of insane to me that the markets are closed on weekends or after market times. There was this joke about some Solidity contracts that had a modifier that didn't let them trade before 9 a.m. PST and 5 p.m. PST or EST or something. But I think the 24/7 availability is just super important and one of the most exciting selling points of why crypto is interesting. Friday, whatever time I want, I can send a stablecoin payment. It's landed to my friend's account in a second or two. And what might be getting traded away in all of this process is three things, I think. A, censorship resistance, which some people might have a knee-jerk reaction to it. I might even have a knee-jerk reaction to it. But again, that's what's happening. A real-world asset can always freeze your assets because it's backed by some centralized collateral and they have the ultimate control. A centralized sequencer, even though you can use the force include mechanism in an L1 to make a sequencer include an L2 transaction, there's edge cases that James Prestwich has talked about where, for example, if you have a DeFi lending market and you try to withdraw from that lending market, a sequencer could actually front run your transaction and make the LTVs, they make some value in the protocol change in a way that makes your withdrawal fail. Similarly, if you want to do a swap and you want to swap out of a transaction, you cannot really do that. So anywhere there is MEV and centralized sequencers and shared state contention, then it gets a bit rougher to be able to maintain censorship resistance. Stake centralization in data centers in high performance chains is another huge problem in my view. And I think we should do better. And I think similarly node requirements. And people might harp on solo stakers being a problem. I think there's ways to go around that while still being able to have low-level node requirements. For example, the Monad project is interesting, and it gives you a $2,000 rack or machine that it's pretty powerful for what it can do. And $2,000 if you're running a node might not be that much in context. Public right discovery, I think, is starting to get traded away. I think that's why low latency block times are really interesting, because for every second that the auction doesn't happen on chain, it will happen off chain, and maybe it's better to have it happen in a somewhat more centralized on-chain thing versus it being in an opaque centralized API. And the third thing is what I said earlier, that the source available code might not be the default, and that's a very uncomfortable potential future for me, and I would hope that we can do better than that. I think the theme that you see in all of this, which we talk about a lot in the Paradigm team, is about that the previous generation's dogma might get actively exploited, taken advantage of by the next generation that is competing ruthlessly. I think the important thing is that the net outcome, even if all of these things that might be really scary to me or to someone from the quote-unquote old guard or something, it's still better than being custodial or than being a TradFi. Because custody can be self-custodied, the API access is open, and self-custody can also be verifiable. Transparency means that we have the ledger always available, and maybe there is some flow, but in the end, the asset transfers all make their way on chain. The latency is instant, and the freeze, yes, there might be some fiat-backed assets, but not all of them are, and there's always the big native assets that are just always around and permissionless and great to use. And you pay some volatility for that, and you pay some cost in volatility when the assets go up and down. And maybe that's okay, because ultimately what we've built is much stronger than the previous one. And maybe it's not, the 100x, and we should still aspire for the 100x, but even that, I think, is a huge win and really exciting and a great reason to be working in DeFi. So the third part of the presentation is, okay, what can we do better? So we started about the bar, then we did a bit of a reality check, and now we're gonna see, okay, as researchers, what can we do forward-looking? Yeah, 5 minutes, thank you. What can we do forward-looking for things? So just to reiterate the mission: public, transparent, verifiable markets, fast, cheap, fair, permissionless, word salad, but these are basically the themes that you're looking for. And each one of these has some definition that you can look to optimize for in whatever research work that you do. So I think there's a few directions that are really important to get there. Again, this is a bit of a loaded slide because these are all research directions that have a lot of deep context underneath that people throughout the day today and tomorrow are gonna talk about. I think the very important thing is reducing block times in blockchains. I think that can be done potentially without compromising the network topology. Sub-second confirmation is interesting because of UX reasons, but also because of market structure reasons, because the system is more synchronized to what's happening off-chain. It then brings the LVR down, which is really important for market efficiency. The second thing is cheap consensus verification. I think that's just so important for self-sovereignty and for being able to trust but verify when you need to. The third thing is open source nodes and smart contracts, because that way we know what is happening and that gives us verifiability. The fourth thing is collaborative building and order flow auctions. I think this is super important because that way we avoid monopolies on the order flow and we avoid a world where, for example, a bad actor can start adversely monetizing their users. Then I care a lot about the stablecoin rails to be neutral and verifiable. I had a chart that I wanted to show, which was a stack plot, a percentage-based stack plot, where it was all green and there was maybe 1% over everything else. It was basically that all of the stablecoin supply is dollars. I think it would be super exciting to have non-dollar-based stablecoins in the market for all sorts of reasons, which I can talk after because we're short on time. Scalable data availability that is cheap effectively let us get the best of both worlds, where both consensus can be cheap to operate and you can build performant execution on top. And the final thing, which to me is the final boss and it's the problem I'm working on right now, is the super secure self-custody wallets. For each of them, I think there's a clear area of research. The first one that I think is important is the erasure coded networking. Basically, you can just scale the networking layer massively when you erasure code the packets. Two, I think you can make the protocol verification cheap with zero knowledge proofs. You can design your protocol to be cheaper, and I think zero knowledge proofs are fast enough to do this these days. Three, I think people should be building with MEV in mind. We've been talking about this for so long, and I think people just honestly haven't done well enough. Four, I think that order flow sharing most likely will need TEs to work. Shout out the BuilderNet project. Fourth, on stablecoins, it's what I said earlier, that when you have a big perp market on an L1 or an L2, you can potentially bootstrap a stablecoin off of that or off of other L1 activity. For example, if you have a staked base asset, that creates a natural yield that you can use in your carry trade when you're structuring that stablecoin. Then data availability sampling, again, we gotta do it better. We have John from Silvestri here and talk about that. And finally, secure smart contract accounts, because the smart contract account is effectively like a software emulated HSM, which is really exciting because it means I can build like something that has hardware grade security in software. And I think that just hasn't been explored sufficiently, and talk to me if you care about that after. In the context of what should Ethereum do, Paradigm, we wrote like an article on that a few months ago where the TLDR is move fast. And many times when you have a dilemma of A or B, and Dan on the back had a great quote when we were talking about that, which is that it's very easy to talk about your values when you want to like make people decide between A or B. And if they pick a value that's different than yours, say they pick B and you pick A, you will shame them. We don't think this is the right way to be thinking about things. We think the right way to be thinking about things is holistically and from every perspective. And it happens to be the case, I think, that in most of these dilemmas, the dilemma is fake, and just doing more lets you do A and B without even having to face the trade-off. So the takeaways is that competition is ramping up. So I said you will hear it once more at the end of the talk, and I promise I will shut up now. Competition is fierce. It's time to amp it up. There's a lot of trade-offs to be made. The trade-offs are not shameful, but they will require a lot of thoughtfulness to be able to execute on them in a way that doesn't regress to TradFi. And it seems like even the people that have taken the most aggressive trade-offs are still landing in a somewhat better place than TradFi, which makes it really exciting. And yet, we can do so much better by answering some really important research questions. I think that's super exciting, and that's what we're going to learn about today and tomorrow and for the next many years as we do DeFi research. Thank you.